This is Keys to the Shop, episode 101, Avoiding Legal Pitfalls in Coffee Retail, with Marshall Fuss, attorney at law. Hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of Keys to the Shop, where we give you the insights, inspiration, and the tools you need to grow as a coffee service professional. My name is Chris DeFurio. I'm really happy to have you here today. Really good subject today. We're going to be talking all about the legal pitfalls that coffee shops can find themselves in, how to avoid getting into those pitfalls in the first place, and some best practices for what to do in 5 key areas. So we're going to be talking to our guest, Marshall Fuss, all about this today. It's going to be a really great episode. Before we will get started, though, I do want to thank our sponsors here at Keys to the Shop. And we want to start out by thanking Prima Coffee. So Prima Coffee, they are a specialty coffee equipment supplier based out of Louisville, Kentucky. And their mission and purpose since the beginning has been to bring the best coffee brewing equipment available to the general public and professionals alike. So their focus is on curating the best equipment for every need, from grinders to espresso machines, under-counter refrigeration, commercial or home. They have everything you need. So if you're looking to open a new store that for the first time, or you're expanding an existing store, they can hook you up for sure. They are really great to work with, and I totally vouch for them. I really appreciate what they do and how well they do it. So go to prima-coffee.com, reach out to them, tell them Keys to the Shop sent you, and see how they can help outfit you with the right kind of equipment for your need. I mean, they put a big emphasis on having the expertise to help their customers get the right gear to fit every situation. So I know you're going to have a good experience. That's prima-coffee.com. And my thanks to Prima for their support of Keys to the Shop. I also want to thank Pacific Foods, the folks behind the Pacific Barista Series line of non-dairy performance beverages. Those are designed specifically for the professional barista and the standards for excellence that they demand. So whether it's almond, soy, coconut, rice, or oat milk, its ability to take the heat from steaming, produce an unmatched, silky texture, and keep the flavor balance focused on the coffee makes it just the perfect choice for your cafe's menu. And Pacific has been a huge supporter of specialty coffee for a long time, and they demonstrate their passion for the community by listening to and serving the needs of real specialty coffee professionals, as is seen in this product specifically. So go to pacificfoods.com, that's pacificfoods.com, and learn more about how the Barista Series line of non-dairy performance beverages can help elevate the offerings of non-dairy options in your cafe. And my thanks to Pacific for their support of Keys to the Shop. So today, talking about legal pitfalls, how to avoid them, things that you should be doing on your way to owning a shop. Even if you already own a shop, maybe you were unaware of some of the things we're going to be talking about today. There are just a ton of details that go into starting a coffee shop, and so much of it is driven by a dream, a vision, and the passion for coffee and community, or the big idea can often cause us to overlook the mundane, or somewhat mundane, but super critical legal details. And this can turn the dream that you have of a cafe quickly into a nightmare. So today we're exploring 5 key areas that shops tend to overlook in this process. And to do that, I've invited onto the show, and I'm so honored to be welcoming Marshall Fuss, attorney at law, to the show. So a little bit about Marshall. Marshall has been practicing law since the late 70s. He got his BA from University of California, Berkeley, and his Juris Doctor degree from Cornell Law School. He is a transactional lawyer with broad experience as a counselor to entrepreneurs and institutions, and he has a particular focus on the coffee industry. He is a passionate coffee guy, and he is a former partner in a national law firm, and he's rated preeminent by the Martindale-Hubbell Legal Directory. And Marshall Fuss currently serves as legal counsel to World Coffee Events, Coffee Quality Institute, and the Specialty Coffee Association. So Marshall brings a wealth of knowledge and perspective, obviously, both the coffee world and the legal world combined, and we get the benefit of talking to him today and learning from his wisdom, experience, and expertise. So there's a lot here. I want to get to it. So here now is my interview on avoiding legal pitfalls in coffee retail with Marshall Fuss. Marshall, welcome to Keys to the Shop. I'm really happy to have you on.
Hi, Chris. Glad to be here.
It's been quite a while since you and I have chatted, actually. You and I have known each other from the old days. Not many will know about the alt.coffee Google group, the coffee geek community back in the early aughts. That was quite a time.
Yeah, it was. It actually had a direct impact on bringing me into the coffee world, both as a consumer and a professional.
Yeah, that's interesting because coffee is not your story. Originally, you're in law and you transitioned into coffee and you have a focus on coffee and law. But how did that happen? Talk to us about how you went from law to coffee.
Well, lawyers often dream about combining their personal passions with their legal work and rarely get to do it. But I had a passion for coffee that I guess my mother planted the seed. She had a S.C.O.R.E coffee grinder, and she would buy whole beans, and she had a Bun coffee maker, and we're talking late 50s, early 60s. So that there was an attention to quality in our home. And then when I went for my undergrad, I went to Berkeley, and the campus was surrounded by beatnik, hippie, revolutionary coffee shops. And I mean literally surrounded. There were at least 4. And I'd hang out at the famous Cafe Med, where they claimed to have invented the cafe latte, and the 3 C's on North Side. And I just thought, well, that's what every college town is like in the late 60s, early 70s. And then I went off to law school and moved to Ithaca, New York, where I discovered that was not the case at all. and at that point in 71 to 74, I decided my favorite beverage to stay up was no-dos.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah, it was a real desert, but then later on, Gibney moved in and opened up, and Kevin Cutterback's done a great job there. Quite different. So, yep, that was how it started. And then when I came back to Los Angeles to practice law, I immediately sought out roaster retailers who were on my way to work, and I'd buy a fresh bag of coffee every week, which was probably not that common in the mid-70s, but we were lucky to have those people.
Well, yeah, you've seen the industry evolve from almost nothing to kind of the thriving scene that we have today. It's a very unique position to be in.
Yeah, and very rewarding. It was kind of it started out as a kind of a clique, and we never imagined it would grow to the extent it has. I got involved in the online community in around 2000 when I started looking for a better home espresso machine, and that little community included for people who don't remember news groups or Usenet, which was the formal term. It preceded the web-based forums, and this was unmoderated, and it was a great gathering place for consumers and for professionals. And that little, I remember some of the most active members were Donald Schoenholt, who of Gillies Coffee, who was and is an encyclopedia of coffee history. Greg Skase, who invented the everyone calls it the Skase device now. I know for a fact some people don't know there's an actual human named Skase. And Andy Schechter, who together with Greg pushed for the adoption of PID controllers in espresso machines.
That's right.
And several others. And around 2003, Mike Ferguson, who was the director of communications at SCAA, noticed us, and he started participating in conversations. And there was a movement at that time. I guess it still exists to some extent, but companies were looking for influencers in the consumer community, people whose friends and family relied on them for advice about what to buy. And that this applied to many industries, but they had the idea we were influencers. People looked to us on alt.coffee for coffee buying advice, for equipment, and for roasters. And they invited Mike and Ted Lingle, who was the executive director at the time of SCAA, invited us to start a consumer division, a membership that was called C Members. And so we had the honor and privilege for a couple of years of setting up consumer programs at the SCAA expos. And even when that program ended, because I lived within driving distance of SCAA's headquarters in Long Beach, I was asked to present consumer events there. So for several years, I organized consumer education events, and I used that as an opportunity to get to know a lot of people that I really admired in the coffee industry. And the next step was a couple of years later, after there was a transition at SCAA from, first it was after Ted Lingle. There were one or two in between, but when Rick Reinhardt came on, I knew Rick, and he asked me to do a couple of legal projects for SCAA, and I guess those worked out to SCAA's satisfaction, so I was asked to become their outside general counsel, and there I remain.
I'm sure you've seen lots of different situations in your favorite shops and in shops in general where, as a lawyer, you're looking in from the outside thinking, I wish they knew X, Y, and Z, and there's a lot of unnecessary suffering at the hands of maybe being a little bit legally ignorant. And no fault of their own necessarily, but what are some of the major things that you were seeing in the industry that really made you start to think, man, shops need some real primers on legal advice? I know you present on this topic during SCAA conferences, but what were the kind of things that you were seeing that kind of tipped you off like this is a real problem that needs solving?
I guess the two I saw most frequently were really bad leasing decisions and really poor choices of business names and trademarks. And those were things that could easily have been avoided by taking some few steps. And people I saw who made terrible, I'll tell you, the saddest mistake I ever saw was I would sometimes represent individual coffee shops, and a couple approached me. And in fact, they came to my office, and they were so sad. They had assumed a lease in a good location and had put their heart and soul and money into fixing it into a beautiful shop. When they assumed that lease, they didn't read it. And they just relied on what the landlord and the vacating tenant told them and did not read it. And the sad fact was that the lease had an expiration date in, I think it was a year or so from the time they signed. And at that point, it was only a week or two from the time they came to my office.
Oh.
And what had happened in between was the landlord's wife came in and said, "Wow, this place is beautiful. When that lease is over, I want to start my own shop there." And
no.
yes, and they had absolutely no legal recourse. I felt so bad for them. I don't know if you want me to tell really sad stories. I can tell you sadder stories.
Well, I don't know how depressed we want to get here, but
I could get really depressing, but I'll avoid that. These are, I know lawyers are not cheap, and for a mom and pop shop, for maybe a barista who wants to move on to ownership, and they're scraping by their savings and some money they've raised from family members. Legal fees seem like an unnecessary expense. And I am definitely not promoting my own business. Come to me. By all means, use lawyers in your community who are familiar with the local regulations and the local legal landscape.
Yeah, so getting a lawyer, getting legal advice at the very least, that's kind of, why you're here and what we're going to talk about today. Some areas, 5 in particular, that you have presented in conferences before that are kind of key legal areas that coffee shops can tend to overlook that need some attention. And so I would love to go over these areas with you. And the first of these is the formation of the business. Like, what type of business do you want to be? Can you talk a bit about that?
Sure. I mean, legally, you don't have to form a business organization. If you're one person and you want to go into business, you can sign everything in your own name, and we call that a sole proprietorship. But that means you're personally liable for every sort of lawsuit or claim that might come your way. And most businesses choose to form a business entity that gives them some what we call limited liability protection, which means that in most circumstances, only the business entity they've funded is legally liable to people who sue them, and you can't go after the person individually, except if you've signed a personal guarantee, but which would likely come up with a bank loan. But in other circumstances, somebody slips and falls in your shop, somebody's burned by coffee, you would want to have you would want the comfort of knowing you're not personally liable. It's your business entity that's liable. And over the last 20 years, the business entity of choice for most small businesses has shifted from the corporation to the limited liability company, or LLC. Almost every state has some form of that entity now. And they're relatively easy to form, and generally can be done fairly quickly. However, simply forming that organization can get a little more complicated if you have partners. If there are other people involved in the ownership and management of the business, you need to have an agreement. It functionally serves like a partnership agreement even if you're in an LLC. But what it covers is who's responsible for what areas of management, who is paid out first when money comes in what proportions is the money divided, what happens if one of the owners wants to leave and start a new business, or there's a disagreement among the partners. And I'm going to push again here for the value of using an actual flesh and blood lawyer rather than one of the online companies, because the forms that the online services that create LLCs, the forms they provide you, they're pretty satisfactory if it's just you by your lonesome. But if you have partners in your business, the ones I've seen so far are woefully inadequate and can lead to tremendous problems when a member wants to leave or passes away or gets sick. So you want to form a business entity, you want to have a competent lawyer work on it, and that's it. Another purpose of having a good agreement is it forces you to confront issues you don't want to confront at the outset of a business. When people do not start businesses with their partners with a pessimistic outlook, they don't go into it thinking, and now how are we going to deal with our bankruptcy?
Mm-hmm. I'll start with a prenup.
Right. That and Chris, that's astute. Yes, it's exactly what it is. It's a prenup. So a lawyer will force you, as unpleasant as it might be, to face those issues that you'll have to confront if things don't work out the way you expect. And they can work out for good reasons. Maybe your partner's spouse gets a fantastic job in another city and has to move away, and that's great news for them. But how do you deal with buying out their share? Do you pay it out immediately? Do you pay it out over a period of time that you can afford? Those are issues you would want to see covered in your limited liability company agreement.
And having that flesh and blood lawyer is what you recommend. There's the nuance there. There's the details that the too good to be true forms that kind of build themselves on ease of use are really too good to be true.
Yes, except if you're all by yourself, I've actually found it doesn't matter that much if you're the only owner of the LLC, because you're really king of the kingdom and can do pretty much what you want. So I think they're generally okay for that.
That's excellent advice. I can hear the thought of, the legal forms are much cheaper than hiring a lawyer. That may be true, but this next section that we're talking about would help with that, because it's something that sounds like you should put into the cost of opening your business, and that's the part of raising money. Talk to us a little bit about the legalities involved in money raising for your coffee shop.
Okay, well, this is obviously going to be very different depending on whether you're a brand new business, say you're a barista starting to own your first shop, or whether you are an experienced business person. Things will shape up differently. But I'm going to talk from the standpoint of someone who is a real novice. Banks are not that friendly to new business owners, particularly to coffee shops, if it's one standalone. And if they do lend you money, they may require guarantees by more financially well-off relatives. In other words, the bank of mom and dad. Mm-hmm. But if you're getting a guarantee from the bank of mom and dad, maybe you can use the bank of mom and dad directly and just borrow from them. If you're lucky enough to have parents who have the resources to do that. But most businesses start off with either their own savings or they approach family and friends. Now you have to face the question: you're raising money from family and friends. First of all, you do have to face the question: if the business goes south, will they still be your friends, and will your family members still speak to you? Be very, very careful about those relationships, because an unhappy lender who was once a friend can become a lost friend if you can't pay them back. But nevertheless, that that is one of the most common ways of raising money for a new business. You should also put that, however you raise that money, whether it's an ownership interest or it's just a straight up loan, that should also be in writing. How much money are they lending? Over what period of time will you pay them back? What will the interest rate be? And if they're investing as a partner, are they going to be a silent partner, or are they going to be, which you can enforce in your LLC agreement, or are they going to be a silent partner who's very noisy and has lots of advice on what you should be doing in the shop? And in your mind, you thought they were silent, but in their minds, they thought they were your real partner.
Oh, you meant that kind of silent.
That kind of silent, right? So that's the sort of thing that can be covered in an LLC agreement. Or an investment agreement. I'll say a few words about securities laws. Generally speaking, you don't have a legal problem with approaching friends, close friends and family, to help you out in investing in your business. But if you go much beyond that, if you, God forbid, put an ad on the internet saying, come invest and become a partner in my company. And I'm not talking about Kickstarter. If you do that, then you're going to run into something called the securities laws, which were created to protect investors from unscrupulous business people, but they wound up being very expensive to comply with. If you want to go out and raise a lot of money because your ambition is you don't just want one little shop, you want to right off the bat, you want to open 5 shops in your first year and a half, and you want to raise a lot of capital, then you may be getting into an area of the law where you have to create substantial disclosures. You need audited financial statements. You have to be careful about the net worth of the people you're raising money from. And you should not get into that area at all unless you're working with a lawyer with the significant securities law experience. But by and large, most coffee shops start off with raising money from a very small group, and they don't get much into securities laws issues.
Mm-hmm. Or they get business loans from the bank.
Right.
And what are some things that you've seen people do wrong when it comes to getting these loans?
Not coming in with a business plan.
Mm.
You should be working with your accountant. And this is not something scratched on a napkin, and it's not a best case scenario, but you should have a spreadsheet that shows you what your best, medium, and worst case scenarios are for your projected revenues and your projected expenses. And that is something a good accountant is invaluable. In fact, you shouldn't even think of starting a business without a good accountant. Mm. They'll also help you with tax issues. How do you write off the equipment? Is it better to lease equipment or buy equipment? I'd also like to say a few things about Kickstarter. Kickstarter, if you notice, when you are asked to kick in some money on Kickstarter, you can be promised all sorts of benefits, but what you are never promised is an ownership interest in the company or a percentage of the profits of the company. And that's because Kickstarter was specifically structured to avoid the securities laws. If you're not selling an investment, then the securities laws don't apply. So Kickstarter's not bad, and lately people have been using Kickstarter not because they need the money, but because they want to get a feel for what the market is and how many people would really be interested in their product or service. I know Tonks just did that in kicking off his Yes Please. Mm-hmm. I think you interviewed him recently, didn't you?
Yeah, we interviewed Tonks just recently on the show, and seems like he had a pretty successful Kickstarter. So, we've got the money, whatever means we found to get it, and we're now looking at the space for our business, and we've got our eye on one particular piece of property that is like the Shangri-La, like our perfect coffee bar location. Leases are one of those things. You started us off with that super depressing story about a bad lease. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about the ins and outs of the legalities of leasing. All
right. I probably spend more of my legal time on leasing than anything else. Commercial leases, to some extent, they are regulated by a different set of laws from apartment leases. And so people should not make assumptions that the protections they have as an apartment renter will also protect them as a commercial renter. In fact, there are relatively few legal protections for a retail renter. The courts will look to what's written in the lease to decide what your rights and responsibilities are. So it's critical, and many landlords or their real estate brokers will give you a long piece of paper and say it's the standard form. No one's ever complained before. Just sign here. and this even assume this is obviously you will have negotiated the rent with them, but maybe you don't think it's important to look at anything else. Well, it is. So a few critical issues to look at are, first, the term of the lease. You do not want to be in the sad position of building out a beautiful shop in a great location with lots of traffic to your shop and then have to leave prematurely. There's no single standard lease term, but I can say with good degree of confidence, the most common is a 5-year lease with the tenant having a 5-year option to renew. Now, within that 10-year period, there are usually some escalators from year to year. It might be it increases by a percentage. It might be it increases by the cost of living. It's common that if there is that 5-year option to renew, that at that point there's an appraisal done to see how the fair market value has changed. But beware, if you're in a down market, the lease will probably say it's adjusted to fair market value, but it won't be less than 3% more than the last rent you paid under the first term of the lease. So term is important. If you're in a multi-tenant building or a shopping center, you will want some kind of exclusivity. And you may think in your head coffee shop, but you have to define what that means. A lot of businesses sell coffee. Fast food places sell coffee. Restaurants sell coffee. Bakeries sell coffee. So you will need some careful language, along the lines of, not more than the landlord won't rent to anyone whose business constitutes more than X% in the sale of coffee or coffee-related products. You want to know what expenses you're responsible for. And in the leasing world, there are two broad kinds of leases. One is called net, used to be called triple net. The other is called gross. A gross lease is more like it's more like an apartment rental. The landlord maintains everything, and you just pay rent. These are most often seen in multi-tenant buildings because the landlord doesn't want you to do your own maintenance of the building. The landlord just wants you to maintain what's within your own space. Mm-hmm. But on top of that, even in the gross lease, there is something called common area maintenance, or as known in the trade, CAMs. And that gives the landlord the right to pass through to all their tenants the landlord's cost of maintaining the building. So the landlord has to maintain the roof under the lease. Good news. But the landlord will pass through by percentage of square footage, usually by percentage of square footage occupied by each tenant. They will pass that cost through to the tenants. And the maintenance crew the cleanup crew, the janitors in the building, the update of the repaving of the parking lot, the common area lighting, common area water. There are lots of expenses that the landlord can pass through, and I can assure you, because I also write leases for landlords, that the landlord will pass through as many as possible to you. So
well, it sounds like you're hiring people sight unseen through having this type of lease. Like, you don't know what type of plumbers the landlord is going to use or the type of electricians he's going to use and things like that. Could be risky.
Yes, that's true. And you can ask for, and it's not that unusual, you can ask for a right to audit the landlord's expenses. You get to take a look. You say the landlord says it costs X dollars for electricity. Well, you want to see the electricity bills, and you can ask for that right, and many tenants do, and particularly larger tenants insist on it. They have an entire division devoted to auditing landlords' CAM charges, but it's something you should have a right to look over the landlord's shoulder and check that they're being honest. I mentioned roof. Maybe this is getting a little too much in the weeds on leasing, but there's something that's now required by court decision in California, and would be a good idea to include in any lease if you're a tenant. If major capital costs, and the most common happens to be a new roof, if major capital costs can be passed through to the tenant, you should provide in the lease that it will be amortized over its useful life or over a 12-year period. Here's the scenario you don't want. In the last year before you move out, the landlord has to or wants to install a brand new roof with a 20-year life that costs $75,000, and he's going to pass that entire cost through to his current tenants, including you. Maybe you're the only tenant, and the landlord and the future tenants will get the benefit of it, but you are planning to move out next year and you still have to pay for it. So
sounds awful.
It is awful, and it can be very contentious. So if something is a significant capital improvement, you want that to be passed through on an amortized basis.
And you can force that issue with them.
Well, you can ask for it.
Okay.
Yeah. The landlord can also refuse. In California, though, it's as a matter of law. Okay. So
it differs state to state, or is it
does
pretty
differ.
much just in California?
Caveat. Caveat's a nice legal word for. This is a disclaimer. I'm a California lawyer, and I'm speaking mainly from California experience. There are some significant differences in real estate law from state to state, and in even some cases from city to city. But I'm trying to talk in general terms of things that would apply almost everywhere.
So that kind of dovetails nicely with the next part here. We're talking about improving the facilities. We're talking about maintenance, and when you get this white box, as it were, for most people, they just get like the vanilla box and they build out from there. The build out, there's some legal things that you need to be aware of when it comes time for the build out of a cafe. What are those things that we should be aware of?
You have to pay very careful attention to your construction agreements. The first thing that stands out for me is keeping the attention, devotion, and dedication of your contractor for as long as you can. Because particularly when business is good, contractors have a habit of signing lots of contracts and coming in with a rush of work, and then they disappear for 2 weeks because they're working on another project. Mm-hmm. I think almost everyone who's been involved with contractors has had that experience. How do you keep their loving devotion? Well, the best way is in their pocketbook. For one, you should always have money that is withheld at each stage of the project, and usually it's about 10% if you can negotiate it, and is not that's withheld until almost everything is finished. Also, you should ask for penalties if they're late. You should have a completion date, and if construction takes longer than that, then their fee gets cut day by day as the delay goes on. You want to make it hurt. Let me put it another way. When the contractor has several customers that they're trying to juggle at the same time, if at all possible, you want to make neglecting you to be the most painful choice they can make.
Hit him right in the pocketbook.
Right in the pocketbook. Was that clear enough?
Yeah, that's pretty clear.
The lease will normally have in it, you don't always just get a plain vanilla box. Sometimes the landlord will provide a lot of the build out for you. And that may, especially if you're not really well capitalized at the beginning, which is usually the case, going to the bank of landlord can be a good idea. So for sure the landlord will include it in the rent price, but it may be to your advantage to have the landlord do a lot of the build out for you according to your plans. And then when you do that, that's generally those plans and the details are usually attached to the lease in something called a work letter that says this is what the landlord has agreed to perform, and you don't have to start paying rent until the landlord does it. Mm-hmm. This can be combined with a period of what's called free rent. Very common to have a period of free rent. It's often around 2 or 3 months where the landlord gives you an opportunity to finish the build out of the space, and you don't have to pay rent during that time. Your ability to get that free rent period will depend on the market. Real estate markets change all the time, and they're different from community to community, but that's something negotiable. By the way, just as you should have a good lawyer, you should have a good real estate broker, someone who specializes in commercial leasing, not residential leasing, and knows the market and is looking out for your interest, not the landlord's interest.
We're multiplying people here. got lawyers,
Yes.
accountants.
It's not cheap to start a business.
No. It must be easier to get these types of free rent agreements if you've already got a successful business that's known in the community. The doors might open a little bit easier for you.
Yeah, if you're new, you're starting out, you're starting off with one hand tied behind your back, but hopefully that's a one-time experience, and then your business will grow and you'll become the person that landlords want. So yes, there is that. Few other items. This is sort of a crossover between the build-out issue and the lease. Is you want a period of time in the lease where you can do due diligence. You want to know that the space is in a place that's zoned for the type of business you want to open, that it has enough parking either on site or available locally to satisfy local parking requirements, that it complies with the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act. You would be amazed how many spaces we're going on now, 30 years or so after the passage of the Americans with Disabilities Act, and you'd be amazed at how many retail spaces still do not comply. The bathrooms are too small. Doorways are too narrow. There are stairs where there should also be ramps. Mm-hmm. And you want to guarantee from the landlord in the lease that the building is currently in compliance with all building codes, including the ADA. One other item, if I could go back to the lease, insurance is really important. The lease will have insurance requirements, and some of those requirements are likely to be unfamiliar to someone who doesn't have a lot of experience with insurance. Here is some professional advice you'll be able to get for free. Show the lease to your insurance broker, specifically the insurance clauses, so your broker can tell you whether you have those coverages or not, and if you don't, how much they're going to cost you.
So you can adjust before you sign anything.
Yeah, be sure you know what's involved.
This is a lot of work to start that dream, start that coffee shop, but it hurts way more to get shut down.
Yes, it does, and it happens, or you get sued. There are lawyers who've made an entire business out of some person that they hire in a wheelchair to go to businesses, find out they're non-compliant, and then the lawyer sues them.
We were talking earlier briefly about something else that'll get you kind of shut down, and that is you mentioned you've seen some of the biggest problems around trademarks and naming the business and that kind of intellectual property. This is one of those things that is done lovingly over the kitchen table where you're trying to figure out the name of your business and you've just landed on a great one, and maybe you go through with it and you just find out somehow that somebody else in your same state or whatever has the exact same name, but it's too late. And I mean, how do we avoid that, and what are the legal things that we should be aware of when it comes to naming and trademarks?
Do your homework first. When you're sitting around that kitchen table, don't just come up with one name. Come up with choice A, choice B, choice C. You might even go on to D, E, and F. The reason is trademarks are a very crowded field. And if something sounds really clever and unique to you, there's a good chance it sounded really clever and unique to somebody else. And you don't want to get a cease and desist lawyer from that person's lawyer 2 years down the road where you have to change all of your branding because you picked a mark that was already owned by somebody else. Mm-hmm. Now, what does it? So how do you find out whether you've got a safe name or not? The biggest mistake I see new business people make is they go to their state's Secretary of State, which is what the department is usually called, that controls corporations and limited liability companies. And they usually have an online list of corporations or LLCs in the state, and you can go search that name, and lo and behold, it's not on the list. And you think, I'm safe. Or
no, but you're not, apparently.
No, you're not. And here's the reason. If someone has a federally registered trademark, and you know it's federally registered when they, at least if they did it properly, if it has that little R in a circle next to the name or logo, if it's federally registered, that gives them protection through the entire United States. Even if you're one shop in Gainesville, Florida, you can sue somebody in Olympia, Washington for using your trademark. So how do you do that? How do you search those federal trademarks? Well, the United States Patent and Trademark Office, USPTO.gov, has a very good search engine, and it will take you to a list. If you use it properly and put in the proper keywords, it will take you to a list of live current trademarks, expired or dead trademarks, and pending trademarks where an application has been filed. It's free, and it's the single best protection you can have. The next free protection, obviously, is Google that name and Google every variation of that name to see what comes up, and just Google that name and add coffee to it and see what comes up.
Yeah.
Good chance you'll find that there's another company that's using it. Now, that company may be doing business in another state and not have bothered to get a federal registration. And if they haven't, then if you're outside of their marketing area, they can't stop you from using it. But it's hard to say today with the internet what your marketing area is, because they may have whole bean bag or ground coffee bag customers in your community that they sell to through the mail and internet sales. So even there you have some risk. So for ultimate safety, you should try to avoid a name that's not the same or similar to another name. I should add here that the Trademark Office considers translations into foreign languages to be whatever their English equivalent is. So if you give a Spanish name because there's so much coffee in Brazil and Central America, and you translate that trademark into Spanish, no, you've just committed a violation.
Yeah,
so
what's Stumptown in Spanish? Let's just. I have a follow-up question to that. Would be, I mean, how similar is too similar? Is there any kind of rule that says, percentage-wise containing X number of letters or words that are similar to or arranged in a similar way? I mean, how do you know that it's too close to be legal?
What it all comes down to is, would a consumer be likely to confuse your mark with the other mark?
Mm-hmm.
And this means an average consumer. This doesn't mean your mother-in-law. And in fact, when these cases go to court, surveys are actually done. They ask consumers on the street, have you heard of this company? Have you heard of this company? Or, do you know who this company is? Here are two companies. Do you know which is which? They actually do that, and then that evidence is admitted into court as to whether consumers were actually confused by the similar name.
Oh, wow.
Yep. I should add that there is a further layer of search protection if you really want to do a thorough clearance. Thomson CompuMark is probably the best known company. And for a few $100s and a very quick turnaround, they will give you a list of registered trademarks, applications, what we call common law marks, which are trademarks that have not been registered but are in use, which they get from trade directories, internet, all kinds of sources. And certainly more substantial companies depend on searches like Thomson CompuMark before they pull the trigger on any new branding.
So we've covered a lot here, and this has just been super substantial in terms of takeaways and things that are going to help us really stay in the clear when it comes to having a sustainable shop that's legally protected and solid. So the next thing is we're gonna stop the podcast, and we're gonna take the next step. But the question is, what is the next step? What would you advise people to do after hearing this information to take action on these things? Or what are some resources that they can sort of keep this momentum going so that they can take action and do their due diligence for their business sake?
Well, in addition to the lawyer and the real estate broker and the accountant, not necessarily in that order. In fact, I might put the accountant first. In addition to all of those, there is a government program where retired business people give free business advice to small businesses. And it's a program, the acronym is S.C.O.R.E. I don't actually know what it stands for, but they have a website, S.C.O.R.E.org, and if you go there, they will direct you to a local office where they will hook you up with a business person who can advise you for free.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's really a great resource. So get that accountant first, because it sounds like that's going to be kind of the bedrock, and then add to that the other get a lawyer, real estate agent, and things like that. The information here has just been really, really valuable. So thank you so much, Marshall, for taking the time to just lay all of this out. These things are so critical, and I really appreciate you adding value today.
You're very welcome, Chris.
Well, suffice it to say, there's a lot to follow up on here. If you find yourself in the position of dealing with any of these issues, I hope today's episode provided some help and clarity on steps that you need to take to make sure that you're protected and set up well for the future, to just make that dream a reality and make it a sustainable reality, and not get caught in something that could have been avoided had more due diligence been done. So my thanks to Marshall for talking with us today and giving us the tools to succeed in coffee retail. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much, Marshall. I have linked to Marshall's website if you want to know more about what he does, and also to S.C.O.R.E, that's S.C.O.R.E. I've linked to that as well, which is that organization of retired business professionals, or business professionals who offer their mentorship for free to you. You get matched up with somebody, or you can basically choose somebody from your city that offers just advice from their years of experience on the field. So that's a really cool program. I know I looked up mine in Louisville, and there are several amazing professionals that are just out there willing to volunteer and give from their experience, kind of like what Marshall did today. So I encourage you to check that out as well. If you want the show notes for this episode, you can go to keystotheshop.com, and on the sidebar, there's a place for you to put your email address. And once you do that, you're going to be signed up to receive a newsletter that delivers the show notes to your inbox every week. And the show notes are really valuable because they are the synopsis of each episode, the key takeaways, quotes, and kind of a bullet point format, questions and answers. It's really helpful to go back over the episode that way. We also have the links that were mentioned in the episodes, anything that was talked about in terms of books or resources or recommended websites. You can find those in the show notes as well. And in addition to that, we are featuring different recommended links for further education in your coffee journey. I'm starting to offer you a curated list of interesting articles and videos and blogs that I come across during the week to help you along your journey, and maybe you'll find them interesting and helpful as well. So again, go to keystotheshop.com and sign up for that on the sidebar. Super simple. I want to encourage you, if you're in the Southern California area, or if you're just wanting to go to Southern California and drink a lot of coffee, you can go to Coffee Fest while you're there, because the LA show is happening from the 19th through the 21st. I will be there judging latte art and presenting 3 different talks. Coffee Fest really is the best trade show for coffee retail. They offer a lot of great free classes and lectures, as well as really accessibly priced classes and trainings for you to choose from. So go to coffeefest.com to learn more about what's coming up at the Los Angeles show. And if you can't make it to that one, Coffee Fest is coming to New York and to Indianapolis next year, and I will be there as well. So I really hope to see you in LA. And if you want 50% off your registration for Coffee Fest, just email me, chris@keystotheshop.com. I will send you a coupon that will give you a code to put in when you're putting your registration through, and that is a really generous thing from Coffee Fest. So thank you, Coffee Fest. Also, if you want to just ask me a question or give me feedback and suggestions and things like that about Keys to the Shop, you can email me at the same address, chris@keystotheshop.com. Always look forward to hearing from listeners to the show, and always enjoy feedback and how the show has impacted you in ways that we can improve. So that's it for today's episode. Thank you for joining me again. I appreciate all of you, and I truly hope, as always, that this episode has given you keys to the shop.